Tonight on Nation to Nation, Canada continues to fight First Nations children at the Human Rights Tribunal, but it keeps losing, mostly because Cindy Blackstock will never give up.
All I can say is I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure these children get justice. I don't care how many court orders it takes.
And we speak to Elizabeth May, who may not be the leader of the federal Green Party, but who will run again as an MP in the next election.
But I love being a parliamentarian. I love working, using the tools of our democracy to help my constituents, to advance causes that I care about.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamarant, and welcome to Nation to Nation. It's the final episode of the season, and also the last of my broadcasting career. However, being that I won't be sitting in this chair again, I couldn't think of a better guest to go out with than Dr. Cindy Blackstock. In fact, I remember joking with her, I don't know if you remember this, I once said that she's here so often that we should give her her own office here in the Ottawa Bureau. But she's certainly more well known for her fight for First Nations children, and it's a fight that's still going on. We've sat across from each other for many years, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to Nation, Dr. Blackstock.
Oh, thank you, Todd, and huge congratulations to you for your new position, and thanks for all your work over the years. Amazing.
Well, your work has been amazing too, and I remember, I think the first time I spoke to you was maybe a dozen years ago in Winnipeg when I worked there. I interviewed the first time, and you were kind of at the start of this whole fight, but we're a dozen years later, and I'm just wondering, has this taken a toll on you after all this time?
You know, I get less disappointed because Canada's failure to really live up to its promises becomes more predictable. And what I feel so supported by is seeing all First Nations, but also all Canadians, having a greater awareness of what's happening and being fed up with the government not doing the right thing by First Nations kids. So now this has become more of a public dialogue, and it's a huge thanks to APTN for covering the hearing and reporting on it.
And speaking of that fight, where are things today with the human rights complaint against Canada? In fact, you're scheduled to be back in court next month.
Yeah, we're June 14th to the 18th. Canada's appealed 2 landmark orders by the tribunal. The first one is all of the children who were harmed by Canada's discrimination. So these are children who Canada admits its behavior created unnecessary family separations and placements in foster care. It harmed children because they were denied services under Jordan's principle. And sadly, it contributed to the deaths of some children. So these are things Canada admits, but it says systemic discrimination is what this case is about. And they shouldn't pay anything to individual victims of it. Can you imagine that, Todd? Like, that's like saying that George Floyd isn't owed any kind of compensation because he's sadly a victim of systemic discrimination against black persons in the United States. It's ludicrous, but that's Canada's position. Second one is First Nations children off reserve who don't have status under the Indian Act. Canada doesn't want them to have access to Jordan's principle. They don't want to pay for that. And in fact, here's the other kicker. They're saying they're worried about the precedent that might set for C-92. So what that means is Canada's all about First Nations lawmaking, but if you do citizenship laws and say it includes your members off reserve, well, then Canada's saying you got to rely on the provinces to pay that. They don't seem too keen to pick up that tab.
And is that just what it boils down to then? It's just financial compensation, or they just don't want to pay the bill at this point?
I think it's they don't want to pay the bill. I think there's still that old mindset that First Nations children aren't worth the money. And I also think that there's something more than that. I think that the government is still very much wanting to be in control and wanting to be thanked. What I've seen over the years is
to be thanked
for its ongoing discrimination. So we're now up to 19 non-compliance and procedural orders since 2016 when the tribunal ordered them to stop their discrimination. And almost at every turn of these orders, Canada has proclaimed itself compliant to the public, said we've done the orders, and then we have to bring them to court, and then they have to implement the orders, and then they take credit for things like Jordan's principle, and then they wonder why we're not satisfied with their partial compliance. Like, it's really an interesting cycle. And I think what we're coming up against is really the internal culture inside of the government writ large, not just Indian Affairs, but inside of the government, that has allowed this conduct to happen not once, but twice, 3 times. Residential school, 60 Scoop, and now.
Is there a bit of disconnect then between the minister and what he says, and when you speak to Mark Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services, he'll quote how many tens of thousands of Jordan principal orders that they fulfilled. Is there a disconnect between him and the department he supposedly runs?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if it seems to me the minister and the prime minister are in charge, if they want to change things, they've shown us they can do it with CERB. And I don't know about you, Todd, but when I was sitting back, I was really happy that the government was there to help families who lost their jobs and stuff. But they were spraying money everywhere. It showed me that it was always possible to treat these children properly. The government of Canada has chosen not to do it. So if the Prime Minister and Minister are motivated to actually breathe life into their commitments and into the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that just went through third reading yesterday, then they need to instruct their staff to do the right thing and stop breaking the law. And more than that, stop fighting these little kids in court.
The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society describes Canada's argument as absurd and shameful, and we've got a sense of that from you here today. Why does your organization take such a hard stand?
Because we don't agree with racial discrimination against kids. And we actually believe that when adults mess up in ways that hurt children and indeed contribute to their deaths, that adults need to accept accountability for their actions and change their behavior so it doesn't happen again, and move heaven and earth to try and make up some measure of justice for children that you've harmed. You know, it's kind of like we talk to our kids. If they say, oh yeah, I'm sorry about that, and then continue the behavior and hurt other people, we wouldn't accept that, right? And yet that's what the government wants for itself. It wants to kind of say, oh, well, we said we're sorry, or we did this, and, you know, leave it up to us. We'll do the right thing. Well, they don't have a very good track record with First Nations kids. It
sounds a bit about what Doug Cuthan, the columnist for the Star Phoenix, wrote just a few days ago. If there was, it just had the will, the department had the will, we probably wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion anymore.
No, and that has always been the case. The government of Canada has the solutions. It has legal orders that it's bound by to implement to stop its wrongdoing. It's just simply by reflex or by some other characteristic choosing to fight instead. And the crazy thing is, Todd, you know, I think we're all told up to about 25 orders from the tribunal, the federal court, and federal court of appeal so far. The kids have won all those orders, except for one that was overturned on appeal. So Canada keeps losing as well. So they're spending tax dollars in a losing case to immorally fight against children.
And again, you mentioned at the very start another appeal that you're going to be hearing June 14th to 18th. If you win that, are we at the end, or is there still more that the government could play out even after that?
There's more they can do. So assuming the children and Spirit Bear win the case again, which I feel pretty confident they will, Canada can still appeal that decision to the Federal Court of Appeal. And then when a decision comes then, they could ask for it to be heard by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can say yes or no. They don't want to hear it or they do, but those are the tracks. And the other thing, we can't lose sight of it, is it's 14 and a half years now since we filed this case, and we're still at the tribunal trying to get full compliance out of these guys. So you got the stuff heading at the tribunal, and then you have Canada appealing these two orders up to federal court.
I suppose with the politics being it is right now, there's the threat always of another federal election with a minority government sitting there. And all the money that was spent to fight the pandemic, I mean, do you really think that the government's going to open up the coffers and finally compensate children?
All I can say is I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure these children get justice. I don't care how many court orders it takes or how much public support we need to get on our side to do it. I think Canadians are way out in front of the government. When Canadians hear about what the government is doing in their name, they're frankly appalled. And so the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the Greens, the NDP, they're all going to be out getting votes. And what I would ask for people is, when they come to your doorstep, have a copy of the tribunal's orders and the Spirit Bear plan and ask them what their position is on that. If they're not prepared to support it and end this discrimination, then they don't deserve your vote. They certainly won't get mine.
Well, finally, we're talking about voting and possibly another election. Have you ever thought of fighting from the inside and running for politics yourself?
No. I've seen a lot of really good people go on the inside, and it's been really hard to change things from the inside. I think at some point there's some of us who are better actors on the outside, and I'm not obedient enough to kind of be in a hierarchy. I've just realized that. My mom, she's very wise. She said, Cindy, you could never work for anyone. And I think that's right. I just work for Spirit Bear and for the kids.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Dr. Blackstock, when you drop by, and you were able to drop by today. Again, thank you, and whoever's my successor will no doubt be talking to you as well.
And huge congratulations and many thanks to you, Todd.
Oh.
We're going to miss you.
Okay, thank you. Don't go away, because coming up is a conversation with former Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Welcome back. Former Green Party leader Elizabeth May has been a frequent guest on Nation to Nation over the years. Maybe not so much recently for pretty obvious reasons, the pandemic being one, and Ms. May's decision to step down as leader of the Green Party about 18 months ago. In fact, it's been nearly 2 years since I last had Elizabeth May on Nation to Nation as a guest. But as I said before the break, I won't be sitting here on this set come next autumn. And before I do go, I wanted one last on-air conversation with one of my favorite members of Parliament. So, Ms. May, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Todd. I just say I'm here in the traditional territory of Wasanic Nation, Haishka Siam, and I really do raise my hands in honor to you. I'm honored to be invited in one of your last interviews, and that very kind remark you just made. You're also one of my favorite interviewers. So thank you for having me on.
Great, thank you. Well, let's get the interview started with my first question, and that's to ask, how has the transition been from the long-term leader of the Green Party to a member of Parliament?
Oh, it's fantastic. I have to say it's a real relief, and I'm very, very grateful that our membership elected Annamie Paul. She's fantastic. She's running, as you probably know, in Toronto Centre. And I'm also very grateful to have a tremendous team of dedicated MPs. I mean, there's only three of us. We're three musketeers. We're small but mighty as a team. So Jenica Atwin, of course, who represents the riding of Fredericton, and Paul Manley and Nanaimo Ladysmith. The three of us are in Parliament day to day, as you say, fighting the good fight. So not being leader has taken not a huge amount of workload off my shoulders, but certainly I am thrilled that I will not be crisscrossing the country in the leaders tour whenever we have a next election. And I'll be part of the team that cheers Annamie on. Annamie Paul will, I hope, be leading the biggest caucus of Green MPs ever into the House of Commons whenever the next election takes place.
And speaking of that next election, on April 20th, you were acclaimed as the Green Party candidate for Sandwich Gulf Islands, which means you'll run again. So what do you feel you have left to accomplish, especially as just an MP?
Oh, well, I mean, in terms of the rights I had in Parliament, my situation hasn't changed at all. Being leader of the Green Party didn't give me any particular parliamentary tools that I didn't have as a sole member of Parliament. With a bigger team after the election, we can accomplish more. I love being a parliamentarian. It's not the first time I've said it, Todd. I hated being a politician, but I love being a parliamentarian. I love working, using the tools of our democracy to help my constituents, to advance causes that I care about. And of course, the more MPs that understand, as your show is called, the nation-to-nation relationship, and really are committed to the hard work of reconciliation, which I don't think we've even really begun. There's so much more to do, and I hope to be part of a progressive movement for making Canada a fairer country and obviously a greener country. We have to confront the threat of climate emergency. We have not done that yet, and that remains what drives me a great deal.
You just mentioned climate emergency. How alarmed are you about the reports about climate change and environmental degradation that seems to continue unabated, and that not much has changed since you were first elected 10 years ago?
Well, what's changed is our emissions keep going up. And I've been working on the climate issue. This is a terrible sign of failure on my part. I've been working on the climate issue since 1986. I was part of was there at the Rio Earth Summit holding my not yet 1-year-old daughter in my arms when the Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed. And since that time, emissions all around the world have grown. And my daughter, who's about to turn 30, her future, and if she has kids, their future. I mean, we're terrified, really. When you look at the science, it's hard not to despair. So I am firmly of the view that we have a good chance now to arrest the growth of greenhouse gases, to really invest in doing more to increase sequestration from trees around the world, forests around the world. In this part of the world, we have replanting of eelgrass to try to sequester more carbon, but we have to stop developing oil, gas, and coal. We have to stop fracking. We have to take this seriously. And I think the role, look back at the election in 2019, not that long ago, and the Assembly of First Nations position was really clear. This is a climate emergency. This is a #1 issue. We can't afford to compromise. We can't afford to think we have more time than we have.
Of course, a federal election is expected before the end of this year. Are you concerned these issues that you've been talking about will be lost in the noise of fighting an election on a recovery from the pandemic?
Well, certainly at this point, there's a lot of global leadership, a lot of nations around the world saying we don't want to go back to quote unquote normal. We have to get to better. There's a lot of good economic evidence that the best way to rebuild our economy is in investments in renewable energy and eco-energy efficiency, making our buildings more efficient. There's a lot we can do. Of course, elections always create, as you say, a lot of noise, more heat than light. But let's hope, and we don't have to have an election this year. We'll see what happens. I mean, we have a fixed election date, which people tend to forget. The next election we're supposed to have is in 2023. But we've seen a number of, I think, very cynical decisions of governments like Premier Higgs in New Brunswick and Horgan in British Columbia deciding, okay, we'll do a snap election that no one needs or wants, and then we can take our minority government and make it a majority. And given our system of government in Canada, a premier or prime minister with a majority has 100% of the power. So there's the temptation to hold elections, to snap an election in order to get 100% of the power. I hope that Justin Trudeau won't succumb to that.
Now, I just interviewed Green Party leader Annamie Paul 2 weeks ago, and she says she's proud and excited to lead the Green Party. But there have been reports of challenges and difficulties she's been facing, which I'm sure you're well aware of.
Yeah.
How much of a distraction could this be for the party heading into an election?
Well, Annamie's very focused. She's very, she's a fantastic leader. I don't think it will affect any of what we're doing together as a team in an election.
Also, I know that party discipline is not the same with the Green Party as it is with other political parties. But did you agree with Fredericton MP Jenica Atwin's decision to vote against the UNDRIP bill at third reading?
Well, Todd, you're right. The concept of party discipline, I think, is to say to members of parliament, when you're elected, just check your brain at the door. The leader will tell you how to vote. And the Greens are completely different, not just in Canada, but all around the world. Greens, and there are elected Greens all around the world. Where there are over 400 elected MPs in countries from Rwanda to the UK to Australia. I mean, we could go on about our party culture and values and how different we are. But one of the things is that we don't have the notion that you all have to vote the same way. Actually, I felt Jenica's vote against UNDRIP helped me vote for C-15. We are very torn about the legislation because we know that Indigenous voices are not all not all agreeing. Russell Dibo is an old friend of mine. Russell's very much against C-15. What we ended up deciding as a caucus was, what do our local First Nations think? Where are we in terms of the territories that we're honored to live on? Jenica's very clear. Jenica Atwin's, the communities and the Mi'kmaq communities around Fredericton did not want her to vote for C-15. The Nuu-Chah-Nulth Nation on Vancouver Island wanted C-15 passed. I have to say very tough call, and I completely respect and honor Jenica, and she is a star. I just love her so much, and and Paul Manley and I both felt the same way. Jenica, we were not disturbed at all by the fact that we were not unanimous in our own vote, because we don't think that there is unanimous support across the country for C-15. I agree very much with my friend Jody Wilson-Raybould. This is a bill that is not perfect. We can take it as a step forward, but we must not make the mistake of thinking that somehow this legislation is the turning point in reconciliation. It is one small step.
Of course, you've mentioned the word reconciliation a couple of times now. It's now considered by many as a meaningless buzzword. What could the Prime Minister do immediately to heal this relationship with Indigenous people?
I'll take it seriously. I'm heartsick around the Trans Mountain Pipeline, to give one example, because elected members of council within the nations within my Saanich Gulf Islands electoral district are standing firm on the Douglas Treaty and saying we weren't consulted. You can't be pushing through this massive increase in bitumen dilbit tankers through the waters of the Salish Sea. You do not have our consent. And what happens is, well, where's the free, prior, informed consent under UNDRIP? This is a Crown corporation that the people of Canada are now funding to build the pipeline. And yet they go to nation after nation, to community after community, and say, this is our Crown corporation, the people of Canada, the money of the public revenues of Canada, to say, we'll give you, you can get a benefit agreement, but first you have to drop your opposition. That's not consultation, that's coercion. And it happens all the time. So, as soon as what is consultation when the Prime Minister stands up and says this pipeline must be built? If it's consultation, then you have to have room to say, okay, maybe we don't build the pipeline. Maybe we reroute the pipeline. What are your concerns? We're here to listen, as opposed to, we will consult and consult and consult until you agree with us. That's not free, prior, and informed consent. So I think we've got to really pay attention to the language we're using as politicians and actually apply it on the ground with respect to a real change in the culture. I mean, we have obviously a colonial culture. We have the Indian Act as the law of the land, a racist piece of legislation. We have to work through that. It's not going to happen overnight, but I don't think saying over and over again, no relationship is more important to us than the relationship with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Unless you mean it, nothing changes.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you. It's been great to talk to you, at least on air this one last time. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Megwich. Haishkasiyam.
We'll have more after another short break. Welcome back. That is the show for the week and the season. In October, there'll be a new person sitting in this chair. Over the past 4 years, it's been an unbelievable experience on this show. Not only the people I've met, but learning about the relationship between Indigenous people and the corridors of power here in Ottawa. It's been an eye-opener. Before I go, a special thanks to Nation to Nations producer Ken Jackson for always having my back. Thanks, Ken. And to my most ardent supporter, my wife, Palangataka Asawa Ko. So for the final time, I'm Todd Lamoran. Stay safe and keep healthy, and thanks for watching.